All right, looking at our course outline, today, February 12th, it's just a work day. We're going to continue using those same techniques we used to composite our landscapes in assignment 1, but we're applying them to a creature design. So the sketching is a little bit different. The conceptualizing, the idea phase is a little bit different. The digital mining of good reference is exactly the same. We want it to be at least 1,000 pixels. I'm going to use Pixabay. Pixabay was down this morning. I'll see if it's back up. I've actually never seen it be down before. It is back up. But there is a backup Pixabay, which is called Pexels, P-E-X-E-L-S, which is just Pixabay, but on a foreign server. And so it's basically the exact same thing. So if one goes down, you can still find your free resources at the other. And we will continue with what we started. So we've already introduced Unit 5. So now I'm just going to go right to the assignments page to skip to where we continue to work on the assignment, right? And on this assignments page, not only do you have a link to where you post it, which is the end of the unit, right? But you also will have some supplementary resources. And as we learn more complex skills, some of those supplementary resources will become more and more helpful, especially after the midterm. So what are supplementary resources? They are not required content of the course, but they are very helpful. And a lot of them are created by past students, right? So what is the supplementary resource for assignment 2? It is this, a professional process exploration and creature design. We're going to look at that. But what was the supplementary professional resource for assignment 1? It was a professional process exploration in fine art compositing. And I was able to show that to the morning class, but I don't think we got to look at it in this class. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm going to show you what's there. And this is to help connect what we're learning to professional careers and also to make an argument to you for why you should be doing it the way I'm asking you to do it, right? Which is always rule number 2. Rule number 1 is do your best, do the best you can. But rule number 2 is do what I ask you to do because I'm trying to teach you kind of the best professional practice. So let's look really quick from assignment 1. And this is kind of a review of setting compositing. This is an artist named Eric Johansson. He is from Europe. He makes his entire living doing composite landscapes and kind of setting designs. And what he does, this was a finished piece by him. He takes most of his own photographs, but he will use stock images and found images when needed, but he always turns them into his own original works. He always starts with a concept sketch, right? And not just one concept sketch, several concept sketches, because that's what tells him, okay, what kind of reference do I need? What kind of models do I need to hire? What kind of big props do I need to build to help get the photos? You know, without the concept sketch, he wouldn't be able to location scout to kind of find the composition he wants in his finished. So you'll see that his sketches are always pretty close to what ends up being the end result. And sometimes the end results are really pretty complicated. So those concept sketches are often influenced by fine art, because he's a fine artist, or influenced by experiments or things he's found online. So once he has an idea of what his composition is going to be, then he'll collect his reference images, and he'll often shoot a lot of his own, and then he'll composite them all together in the computer. So here we take some of his photographs, and you can see way more than 5 layers, right, that he is layering together to build this little world, this concept landscape inside of the bottle. And then he wants an immediate foreground element, because here we have middle ground and background. The immediate foreground element he wants like water on the lens. So the way he did that was to shoot, which is photography, for it, getting an exposure of a plate of glass with all these drips of water. and then compositing that in front of everything else. So you're physically looking through it to get to the middle ground, and then behind it the background. All right, another professional example, and these come from your end-term individual presentations, where you each get to pick a digital artist to showcase. This is an artist named Josh Dickgraf, and he uses compositing in a different way. Sometimes he'll take his own photographs. Most of the time he finds things from online, just like we do. But instead of limiting it to 5 for his concepts, he's building his fine art and his commercial art out of sometimes thousands of different composite cutouts. A little bit more like traditional collage. So here we see him compositing from hundreds of different layers of pixel cutouts, a big Abraham Lincoln mech to kind of symbolize America's identity. And cuts it out, layers them, and that's the finished product, right? Which he'll sell as fine art prints. They each take about 30 to 80 hours of work, and they contain thousands of Photoshop layers. And he'll not only composite with flat images, he'll also sometimes use 3D models, which you can composite in the same way, but they have the advantage of you being able to turn them and light them for your own purpose. This one is this kind of floating city made of different city buildings, skylines, advertising. It reminds me of the Netflix live action One Piece. Really have something similar. And then some of the work he's done professionally, not just personally, or for environmental causes. And these are really, really well crafted. So these are all from photographs of leaves that are then, and bark that's all composited into this really believable bird, or this elephant all made of, Arctic glaciers and mountains, or this seahorse all made out of rubber surgical gloves. Talk about plastics in the ocean. Here's the Queen of England, made out of all these buildings from London. This is an example of another one he did, kind of a test piece, and how he'll shoot some of his reference just to get those layer assets to composite with. And this is something he did for Volkswagen. It is sad because I'll see the personal work looks so passionate, and then sometimes the commercial work looks pretty boring. And that's because commercial work, you have art directors and you have a client, and the client has opinions, and you don't always get to make all the creative decisions, right? But the commercial work you get paid for, so that keeps the personal work going. All right. Now let's look at the supplemental professional process for creature design. And you'll see how they build on each other. So this is an artist named R.J. Palmer, who a student presented on about 10 years ago. And this was someone who is very similar to a lot of you in the early 2000s, was only posting kind of their own digital fan art on social media, on DeviantArt. But what they became really interested in was using compositing, just like we're learning it, to try to make really believable things, right? And the things he really loved were creatures. So he composited these skeletons as accurately as possible from whatever he could read of these dinosaurs using Natural History Museum photographs, right? And then he would composite using anatomical, like medical text, musculature on them. But because there aren't medical text for a T-Rex, right, you're using mostly human muscle groups and then stretching them and connecting them and really understanding the anatomy that's shared by all vertebrate creatures. And so he would layer it up, and his goal was to make, just a very realistic dinosaur, keeping each muscle group in its own layer, keeping the skeleton separate, and eventually building up to the skin. Now, the skin on dinosaurs, this was done before all of the mass acceptance that these dinosaurs had feathers, right? But the skin is the most subjective part because skin doesn't fossilize well. We have some imprints, which is how we know feathers on at least several of these, but it doesn't show us color. It doesn't show us exact patterns where. So mostly you're compositing from contemporary animals, right? Like Komodo dragons or birds or lizards. Okay, then, kind of backwards from how we're doing it, he would put his creatures into composited landscapes to create the full illusion. And then he started doing it with some more outrageous variations, right? I'm not showing you all of his work. But the T-Rex has tiny little arms, right? Pterodactyls have huge arms. And so understanding the anatomy of those different forms then allowed him to start doing it for fantasy creatures in a similarly believable way. So not just doing a dragon that had wings and forearms because that's how European and Western dragon design works, but really trying to combine what he learned about the T-Rex and combine what he learned about the pterodactyl to have both of those anatomical structures available so you can have both sets of arms. And what I love about his design, which Game of Thrones, which is informed by this kind of practice, gets mostly right, but could improve on, is how he uses the spinal column as anchor points for the wings, even going through the tail, so you have enough surface area so that these wings could actually lift a lot of this extra weight, right? So, if you can do it with all this stuff, it all starts with understanding where the skeletal structure joints are and what the proportions are. Because obviously, if you're going to have wings, you need a really large rib cage because you need a lot of bone structure to support all that muscle. That's why we all eat chicken breasts if we eat chicken, right? Because even though those chickens don't fly very far, they're bred to have incredibly large wing muscles or breast muscles to flap those wings. So what evolved from there? Instead of just compositing on a sketch the skeletons, he started making his skeletal templates out of pipe cleaners. And that's something a lot of animators do because it helps you visualize this skeletal structure in 3 dimensions, right? And it lets you pose it. And then he would pose it, and then he would build his layers on top. And this is another little dragon design. And you can see very quickly, even with just simple pipe cleaner, you get everything that's important about that creature. You get the length of their head, the length of their neck, the length of their rib cage, the width of their collarbone, the placement of their pelvis, the length of their legs, the size of their feet, right? And you can really balance those proportions. And that's what we're going to try to do with sketches. So then he experimented doing 2D kind of creature design. And even though everything he's done has been 2D, he's never made 3D models yet. But the same process works for doing kind of animation character design, as long as you're really clear on those anatomical structures first. And even though he's not building it on the rib cage first and on the skeleton, you can see all of those structures clearly in his shape design. So you have cranium, spine, rib cage, pelvis, through to the tail, and all the joints. So then that leads, this is all amateur work that he's posting for free in the early 2000s. That leads to his kind of breakthrough work that got noticed. And that would be his work with Pokemon, right? He also did some work, he wasn't only obsessed with Pokemon and pop culture, he also kind of reinterpreted some of H.R. Geiger's designs from 80s special effects movies like Alien. But this was his realistic Bulbasaur, right? So knowing what he knows about dinosaurs, knowing what he knows about how skeletons really work for dragons and fantasy creatures, really trying to take this seriously and make believable variations that grow into the different evolutions. And he got better and better at this. This one really got noticed because this Charizard design is really cute, but not at all anatomically believable, right? So to try to make it anatomically believable, it still doesn't quite work because the wings are too small, the arms are too big, that kind of thing. But he knows how that skeletal structure would work. He just had to create kind of 2 separate breastbones, like he does for his dragons, and they don't really work on something that's upright. But all of these textures are composited from existing animals, like Komodo dragons, right? But then he's changing colors. Sometimes he's digitally painting on top to get the effects he wants. And then this is probably my favorite one that he did. And it's because it more closely matches, animals that we have reference of. But he really plays with those proportions. And so proportion, even though this really just has all the components